Excellencies, Honorable President of Ethiopia, our gracious host, Excellencies, the Vice President of Somalia, my dear brother, Mr. Claver Gatete, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, government representatives in the room, heads of multilateral financial institutions, my sister Fatima, my brother Admasu, heads of institutions, partners, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me to stand on the existing protocol. Good morning. It is a privilege to address you today at the 2026 Africa Business Forum under the theme, Financing the Future of Africa, Jobs and Innovation for Sustainable Transformation. This subject is absolutely critical. It connects to the work we have done on strategic minerals, State of Africa's Infrastructure Report, Africa's domestic capital pools, and Africa's pragmatic path to net zero. Because they all point to the same outcome, jobs through transformation. I will refrain my speech a bit because my brother Kadete and my sister Fatima have mentioned quite a bit and have laid the context of what we're going to discuss. So I'm going to launch slightly differently. I will start with the Africa we must intentionally build, not wish for. Financing the future of Africa is really asking a sharper question on the Africa we are intentionally building. Let's consider framing the opportunity from our mineral endowment. So, research indicates that we have over $29.5 trillion in minerals under the ground. Now, if we can transform those to industrial output on the ground, that will be the price. When we can convert our minerals into steel, aluminum, fertilizers, batteries, and inputs that drive our industrialization, urbanization, connectivity, energy, and food security opportunities. Sustainable transformation at scale is what creates jobs and drives innovation. Jobs are the outcomes of transformation. Transformation that is a departure from our current dysfunctional extraction systems. I'd like us to focus on outcomes. Let's build on what we are going to deliver and how we deliver. So, my question to everybody here is, I was here last year, we had conversations. I'm here this year, hopefully we'll be here next year. So the question was asked, is what would change in 1 year? What are the policy decisions that we'll be taking? What are the projects that will be financed? And how many jobs are we going to create together? Not announcements, not promises, finance projects linked to jobs that we can measure. Value proposition. Our most urgent priority today must be how we define Africa's value proposition to the world, from a supplier of raw materials to a talented workforce diversifying globally competitive supply chains. Africa's greatest asset is not only what is under the soil, it is who is above it. Our people, our youth, the talent we build. To anchor our discussions on solutions, we must question certain assumptions and norms that exist today. We must ask ourselves powerful questions that will lead to change and the outcomes that we seek. So, for example, why we have accepted dysfunctional extraction models that exploit our resources and jobs we can create by their transformation here in Africa to import inflation, especially when these models compel us to pay for the logistic costs of other economies. For instance, we export iron ore free on board, absorbing all the internal costs of our ports, transport, rail, financing, and we import steel, cost, insurance, and freight. So we pay for the steel products at the factory gate, and we deliver the raw materials to them at the factory gate. Why do we accept a model like this? Now, this is not something that changes by begging and by lobbying. No, that's not how it changes. It changes when we say, okay, if we need 1 billion tons of steel, we will produce at least 300 million. And then we will go on that journey to ensure that over time we can cover the gap of what we need. That is how we change it. It's not by making speeches, it's not by begging, it's not by lobbying. No, that's not what we do. We change it by the actions that we take. This isn't only a trade imbalance, it's a jobs imbalance. It ties our economies to volatile commodity cycles and starves our industrial base for stable demand. And the same is true for energy, power especially. You don't build viable utilities on lightning alone. Industrial demand is what's sustaining electricity markets. People always ask, so if energy is such an essential resource and that's required for development, how come African utilities are not viable? They are not viable because there's no industrial use. That's why they're not viable. And they will not be viable if we're exporting raw materials. We have to change that. So the following question is, what must change so Africa captures the value that delivers quality jobs? We must have a plan to reduce our costs by producing what we consume and can trade regionally. The alignment question, how we create jobs at scale. Jobs happen when we align natural resource plus infrastructure and demand, especially when anchored on regional demand, such as AFCT and our various regional economic groupings, such as ECOWAS, SADC, COMESA, and the likes. With policy consistency and fair risk allocation that unlocks finance. The next question is, how quickly can we fix the misalignment in policy, power logistics, and demand, so sustainable transformation becomes the default outcome across Africa? Research indicates that in Africa, we rarely find all the elements all together in one place. So we rarely find a situation whereby we have the market, the resource, and the infrastructure all in one place. And I'll give one example to demonstrate this point. So South Africa has established long steel mills. There are issues there now, and there are talks about the viability of those industries. Yet, across all of Africa, we're importing steel. Across most of Africa is significant high-grade iron ore, in some cases up to 67, 68%. So why are we not able to connect the dots? Why do we, allow the challenges that exist there to continue? And we have several programs across the continent importing iron and steel and such related projects. How are we not able to connect the massive industrial complexes in North Africa to the resources in West, Central, and East Africa? We must think of how we can move from this system and ensure that we can align where capital is trapped in mainly high-cost financing and debt service to where production is required. Our goal is how to create this alignment. I'll give another example. So Africa is known to have the largest bauxite deposits in the world, in Guinea. Yet, also similar resource exists in Australia, not as large, but similar. But Australia gets so much more value from its bauxite than Guinea does. Why? Because Australia can move from bauxite to alumina to aluminum. In Guinea, it's mainly just bauxite and some slight alumina production. And if you're talking about numbers, for 100 million tons, probably it's about $1 billion. Now, if we can move or transform 10% of that, we're able to create at least, we move from earning, let's say, $290 million from the export of bauxite today to alumina, if you can transform that at 1.2 billion, and to aluminum at 6.2 billion. So imagine that the royalty is 10%. What that means is that you can go from earning 39 million in revenue to earning 630 million. And imagine what that does for the treasury, what that does for education, health, security, and other things that governments have to spend on. So transformation isn't only about creating jobs, it's about expanding the fiscal revenue of our respective governments. And when fiscal revenue expands, governments can invest in the real engine of productivity, education, skills, and talent development, health, security, which creates more jobs across the economy. That is why value capture and retention is not a slogan. It is fiscal survival and is dignity through jobs. How do we finance all of it? Now we come to the heart of financing the future of Africa. Our research on Africa's domestic pools indicated we have $4.3 trillion. Like Mr. Clever mentioned, over $1 trillion in pensions, insurance funds, sovereign funds, and development banks. So the issue is not an absence of capital, but capital that is trapped. The issue is the cost of capital and the prejudice premium that we pay that makes development expensive and in some cases impractical. So the question is, how do we finance transformation and lower the cost of capital at scale? I want us to be pragmatic and to think of most of our lives today. So we have pension funds, we have pension regimes that are focused on risk management. And it is essential because they need to ensure that the funds are safe. But most of us know today that parents continue to support their children even after they've graduated from school and even when they're working. And there are several parents that are concerned because their children don't have jobs. So what is the value in managing our savings to a future that is unstable? Why can't we think about creating jobs for our children? Why shouldn't that be an urgent priority in how we allocate capital for growth? So to answer the questions raised by Claver and the earlier speaker, we need pension reforms. And these pension reforms must be rooted in the reality that we live today. We need to create jobs. And jobs can only be created when we have a mechanism to finance entrepreneurship and creativity. So we should be asking, why do we have a system where most of the pension funds are invested in government security? Government securities are important. Yes, you must finance governments. But we should be thinking of specific allocations that go into financing venture capital, private equity, infrastructure, and industrialization. Without this, we will not be able to create the jobs that are required for the future. And these are the conversations that we must have. These are the policy decisions that we must make for the change we want to see. Another thing we have to look at is government debt and the need for government constant access to financing. So, it is established that projects in energy and transport and logistics can be easily financed. So we should be creating public-private partnerships that allow for such projects to be financed without government intervention, such that the amount governments borrow is lowered, and the private capital can fund our development. Schemes like this is what will ultimately lower the cost of capital. Think about it. I think we have about $200 billion of Eurobonds in the market as Africans. And most of that is by African sovereigns. Now, because of the way finance works, once you keep coming to the market, you pay the price of that's currently traded, and in some cases, you pay a premium on that price. So, reducing that demand is one of the ways to lower the cost of capital. It's not just talking about it. It is in repurposing how we utilize capital. So what I would hope is that we are very intentional about creating public-private partnership desks in energy and transport, and ensuring that we have a pipeline of bankable projects which we can all develop as multilateral financial institutions and as specialist project developers. We standardize risk allocation and documentation so that we can rinse and repeat transactions regularly. We don't have to spend 2 years doing the same thing somebody has done. We should simply adopt what makes sense and move on. The next thing we should be thinking about is how can we create de-risked products. And what that means is how are we putting in place investment-grade guarantees, first loss structures, political risk solutions, local currency solutions, credit enhancements, FX liquidity backstops, so that long-term investors can participate at scale. Another point to consider is how investors price risk. Investors cannot price uncertainty. We must think about the right balance of risk allocation between what the government will do and what the private sector will accept. Cost of capital is not only just a number. It determines whether a project lives or dies, and whether a young person gets a speech or a job. So, we must be thinking constantly about how we can build on skill. The earlier remarks mentioned skill, and it is important that we focus on how that happens. I'll give another example. Africa's iron ore is currently valued at the mines at over $2.8 trillion. If converted into steel and steel-intensive value chains, the price scales dramatically to $25 trillion. This is the pivot that we must make. Steel value chains are not national sports. They are regional platforms for business that we collectively create. And this is based on shared rail and ports, shared power pools, and harmonized standards that produce predictable demand. More importantly, we cannot build Africa with imported building blocks. When we import the steel that shapes our cities, railways, ports, and power plants, we export jobs and import inflation. Digital economy. The future of value capture is also in the digital economy. And here again, Africa has led with mobile money. And several fintech ecosystems have been built, which we need to build upon going forward. The future of value capture and retention is digital, Africa pioneered mobile money, proved that when young creativity builds rails, you create platforms and you create jobs and ecosystems. Now imagine applying that same rails and scale logic to Africa's cultural and digital industry. Afrobeats, themes, sports, fashion, gaming, with the right payment rails, right infrastructure, distribution, data, and capital, Africa can build global creative industries that rival any in the world. For example, Korea did export songs. It exported an industry, tourism, merchandising and content, technology. Africa can scale this faster and bigger, considering that we already have global appeal for what we have. Now, at AFC, what we've tried to do is to support various initiatives. We've supported the establishment of Africa's largest copper complex in DRC. We're supporting the growth of Africa's largest refinery, actually, the world's largest petroleum refinery is being built in Africa, and we're supporting that. We're supporting various fertilizer projects that will make Africa self-sufficient. We're supporting value creation through Arise IIP. We're building Eternal Digital-Free Zone Authority and several other projects. Main one that we built that led to the birth of several African unicorns. We're building a gold mine here in Ethiopia with Addis of TDB, Tolu Kapi. We're financing FG Gold in Sierra Leone with Badia. So we do a lot of things together, and we need to find a way to continue to work together. Credibility is execution. In closing, I want us to focus again on financing the future of Africa. Financing the future of Africa is financing the Africa we intentionally build. Resource aligned with infrastructure and regional demand. Policy consistency matched with fair risk allocation. Fiscal gains reinvested in education and productivity, and a digital economy that turns creativity and innovation into global industries. And the final question that we must answer with actions is, by next year, what will you point to as proof we move from conversation to conversion? And which alignment do we fix? Policy, power, logistics, demand, or cost of capital? Thank you.